Sometimes non-Calvinist Christians object to the idea of the God that Calvinists believe in. And one of their objections is that the God of the Calvinists is a sadistic God and that he's just playing with us. I am a Calvinist and I'd like to refute this objection. The idea is that if what Calvinists say is true, and that God is the cause of all things, that he has created us and has decreed everything that we will do, and everything we'll think, and everything we won't do, and everything we won't think, then God is just playing with us. If that's the case, God is just playing with us. We are his pawns. It's as if God is playing a cosmic game of chess. But the difference is that in this game of chess, God doesn't have an opponent. He's playing on his own because, according to Calvinists, even his opponent, even the devil, does his will. What is more, in this game of chess, God has already written the script for every nanosecond of the game. And he's already determined the result. There's no suspense. He's already determined the result, and of course he wins. Therefore, if what Calvinists say is true about God, then this universe is just a big game for him. It's just a big game. And it's not really real, because everything is predetermined. It's a masquerade. It's an illusion of reality. And God is mocking us. God is laughing at us for believing that things are real. Not only that, if what Calvinists say is true, then the game that God has created is a terrible game. It's a cruel game. Because in this game, God has decreed the Holocaust. God has decreed that in this game there will be children who are raped, serial killers, torture, wars, sickness and disease, and natural disasters and all the rest. God has voluntarily, deliberately predetermined and decreed that these things will be in his game, and so they cannot not be in his game. So if what the Calvinists say is true, life is a cruel game, a terrible game created by a sadistic God. That's the argument. I believe I've represented it faithfully, and so here's my answer to that objection. The objection is in fact a double one. First of all, the objection is that life is just a game, and therefore it's a masquerade of reality. Because everything is decreed, then nothing is really real. And the second objection is that God is a sadistic God for having created such a terrible and cruel game. And I would like to say, first of all, that this accusation of sadism would be correct. It would be an accurate accusation if it was levelled at Allah, the Muslim God. Because Allah can be accused of sadism and of playing with us. We can, I feel, legitimately criticize him for his sadism and for having decreed things like wars and sickness in this world. It's a legitimate criticism, this one, if it's levelled at Allah and not at the Christian God. But we can't use this criticism against the Calvinist God. Why not? Why can this criticism of sadism be levelled at Allah and not at the Calvinist God? Because of the incarnation. The incarnation of the Son of God changes everything. Because if this world is a cruel game, then my question is to people who aren't Calvinists, who suffered the most in this game? Who has suffered the most in this game? The only person who has ever lived in the history of the world to have endured an infinite suffering, an infinite suffering, and the only person who has ever lived in the history of the world who has been the object of infinite punishment, is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on the cross. For Jesus, the cross was not a game. It was real. Jesus suffered infinitely on the cross. The result of this then is that, first of all, the Calvinist God is not a sadist, because it is he who suffered the most, more than anyone else, more than everyone else put together. He suffered the most on the cross because he suffered infinite suffering. Therefore, the incarnation of the Son of God refutes the idea of a sadistic God, because a sadist doesn't suffer more than everybody else. Secondly, in Acts chapter 4 verse 26 and elsewhere in the Bible, we can see that every detail of Jesus' death was decreed beforehand by God. The betrayal of Judas, the 30 pieces of silver, the reaction of the Jews, every detail was decreed beforehand. But nevertheless, Jesus' suffering was really real. Even though everything was decreed beforehand, Jesus' suffering was real. Therefore, secondly, it's not because an action is decreed by God that these actions are not real. Jesus' death was decreed by God, but Jesus really died. Therefore, it's not because an action is decreed that means that it's not real. The cross was not a game for Jesus. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a masquerade. It was real. He was really crucified and he really died. The sacrifice of God's only Son was not a game for God the Father. Sacrificing his Son was not a game. It wasn't an illusion for him. It was a terrible thing for him to do. And the wrath of the Father was not a game for the Son. Taking upon himself the wrath of God was not an illusion or masquerade for the Son of God. It was really real. It really happened. He really drank the cup of the wrath of God. So the incarnation of the Son of God refutes the idea that this life is just an illusion, and the incarnation of the Son of God refutes the idea that God is a sadist. Calvinism answers these problems.